So happy Friday, everyone. This webinar today is recorded. This is our monthly webinar, and today we're going to focus on advanced SQL training for SAP Business One users. And I'm very happy to be presented here today with Elizabeth Cameron. My name is Oren Tabib. I'm the CEO of Pioneer B1, and we're going to walk you through advanced SQL training. Basically, we have in the past two webinar sessions for beginners, intermediate. Today, we're going to drill down into more advanced topics and see how your knowledge of SQL could benefit you for different areas of the business. So we're going to get started. The goal for today is to provide you, Business One users, with more tools to leverage your knowledge of SQL queries and maybe see more advanced scenarios. And also at the end of this webinar, we're going to share a lot of treasures and additional information to enhance your skills and knowledge. Beth?
Wonderful. So to kind of delve more into what exactly we're going to talk about today, first, Oren is going to give you a little recap about what the previous two SQL training webinars covered. Then we're going to delve into some advanced variable declaration, and then take the next three are, in SAP, some of the applications that we can take our SQL knowledge and really apply it to what we're doing with SAP. So that includes our formatted searches, our alerts management, and our approval procedures. We're also going to look into stored procedures and views. We're going to show you how you can take SAP and SQL and be able to integrate that with Excel very easily. And then we're going to provide you with lots of good documentation and save some time at the end for Q&A.
Thank you, Beth. So before we get started, we really want to summarize what we have, the education was done previously. And we have all those sessions recorded and available on our website. We basically, we follow this document that we share at the end of the call. This document is basically a full day training of SQL. And so far we hit the first 6 chapters. So in the first and second video, we talked about how to get started. What are the tools for reporting and querying that SAP Business One have? Then we went through the query manager, the query security and authorizations, how to print query results and things of that nature. Then we talked about the basics of the SAP table, understanding the SAP table, understanding how you know which table to query when you look at a screen. We looked at the main table structure. For example, ORDR is the header and RDR1 is the lines, and same with invoice and delivery and POs and things of that nature. Then we looked at the basic structure of SQL statement and we built few simple queries. We talked about the joins, the different options for join, inner join, left, right join, things of that nature. And we talked about filters, variables, sorting, grouping, kind of more intermediate functions of SQL statements. And then we finished with some conditions, with some nested queries and how to combine multiple queries together. Today, we're going to start with more advanced variable declaration, and I will tell you when also to use that. So the thing with nested queries, when you have query within a query, or when you take all your invoices and deduct credit memos and have that as a nested, in many cases SAP will not like the %1, %0. So you need to define more advanced variable. So let's see how that's done. So I'm going to jump straight to SAP here. And I have prepared a query, and we're going to share it later at the blog we're going to write. Yes, and somebody asked if this session is being recorded. Yes, it is recorded and will be shared on our website and will be sent next week. So if I'm looking at sales analysis with parameters, for example. You see that like the regular SAP screen, it gives you, when you use the %1, %2, and so forth, it gives you the selection criteria. So I'm going to run it from the beginning of the year until today. The advanced variables also allow us to leave some fields empty. So if I don't want to choose the group name or the BP or the specific BP, specific customer, I can leave that empty and that will give me all the results. And we'll see how we did that. So if I maximize that, of course, it gives me all the results of all clients. But let's drill down into the query. So I'm going to click on this and expand that. And you can tell that in this query, we used multiple variables in a more sophisticated way. So first, the verbiage is very important to keep it exactly in that syntax. So obviously, if you use T0 for ORINV, you're going to use T0 instead of T1. And so forth. So in this case, our nested queries, as you can see here, this is, for example, querying INV1 and OINV and the business partners and so forth, and deduct the ORIN tables, which is the credit memos in a minus. And then we union both those queries and put everything under one table called T10. So we can't use here really the T0 and the T1, the %0 and %1, things of that nature. So we need to declare. So we did here multiple declaration. One is date from, day to, as date. Sometimes it will be as n varchar, sometimes it will be as number. So depends what's your data type. And then we also had, OCRG, which is the group, and OCRD, which is the customer, and we gave them n varchar 100 in opposed to a date. And this is really the variable name. So we have 4 variables: car from, car date, the group, and the customer. And let's see how we use them in the query. So everywhere we have the where, this is where we could put that variable. So in this case, we look at all the invoices that are not canceled between dates. So we look at doc date between, get date, taking minus 15 days, things of that nature. But this is really canceled because you see here the 2 dots. So we can really delete that completely because it's not in the query. It's actually a comment to the query. But what we do here is we do doc date larger or equal than current form and smaller or equal to 2. So that gives us the ability to do between dates. And then we use here the 2 other variables. And the way we are able also to tell the software tool if it's empty to bring all the results is using that method. So I'm telling that n group equals the group name, or group is empty. So that single quote twice tell the system if it's empty, bring us all results, okay? And the same thing with the client. So we can get a result for a specific client, or if we leave it empty, it will bring all the results. And same exact where we did on the credit memos portion. So with that being said, if I execute now this report, again, I can give it the date range. I can choose a specific group name or leave it empty. If I choose a specific group of customers, I can leave the BP name empty. It will give me only the results of the specific selected group. So that's it on a nutshell, how we use a more kind of advanced declaration. It will be available also on our website and blog and things of that nature. And before we move forward, let me just go through the questions that we got. They ask if the first 2 will be available on the website. And the answer is yes. The first 2 recording is available on our website, and we'll show that at the end of the this webinar how to get there. And we are going to move to Beth, who is going to talk to us about formatted searches.
Thanks so much. So formatted searches are a really powerful tool that, in a nutshell, let you automate the behavior of a specific field in SAP. So, on a big scale, that's what we're able to do with formatted searches. So we're going to go ahead and, go into SAP and see how this behavior works in SAP. So some of you may be familiar with this formatted search, some of you may not be. Here, for instance, we're going to use the sales order as an example. And let's say that every time we select, for instance, we select a business partner here, they have some notes on their account, and we always want those notes to be pulled into this internal notes field. So let's go ahead and select business partner. They're over their credit limit. And we see automatically, just like that, our notes are pulled in here, telling us, make sure you send that order confirmation. So pretty simply, we can set up a formatted search that allows us to do this. So actually, we'll look in here first. So to open this up, there's a keyboard shortcut, which is the Alt-Shift-F2, or you can open it up from the Tools menu here under right here, this user-defined values setup, Alt-Shift-F2. And when you're on a field, that'll open up this little guy. So there are a couple different options to set up a formatted search. So this first one, that is where all fields start out as default with no formatted search. The second one here allows you to define a list of different values that you want to pick for your field there. And then this one, which is what we're going to look into, allows you to, a really broad range of whatever kind of information that you'd like to pull in on the field. So you define your query here, and then you can define your trigger. For us, it makes the most sense to define our trigger off of this customer field. So whenever that field is updated, our field is updated. And if we want to go ahead, we can open this query and see what it looks like. Oops. So you see there's that little red line at the bottom. So that means this is a type of query, this formatted search query is a type of query that you can't just run on its own. It's not going to pull data just by running it as a query. And that's because of this little bit here. So this $, this type of syntax is referring to the active screen. So that means that we want to select, this value from OCRD, our business partner master data, where the card code of our OCRD matches our ORDR card code or our sales order card code. And this is telling it to look at the active form. So like I said, you can't just run it on its own, but a good way to test if your formatted search is working is make sure that you have, the sales order clicked, it's the active form. And then you can go to Tools, Queries, User Queries, Formatted Searches, and click it there. So that's a good way to just run and test your logic before setting it up, formally in your field, and just make sure that it's going to work. And here we see the results back that it is in fact working. And then just really quickly, there's another way that I wanted to mention that we can set up this logic. So you may have seen it briefly on our PowerPoint slide, but the other way that we can kind of structure this logic instead of, I'll pull them up side by side so we can see the difference here. So instead of this way, where we had ORDR card code, we can use different variables. So we have our field index, field column, and then field type. And so that allows us, structuring it that way allows us to be able to, instead of just using this formatted search on our sales order, our ORDR form, we could use it on any number of forms that have the same type of format. So sales order, invoice, because of the way that SAP is structured, we're able to create formatted searches that can be used on multiple different forms. And just the way to get that information is we can go View, System Information, and then on the bottom left corner, it may be a little small, but you can see all of that information there that we use to, format our formatted search. So any thoughts, Oren?
No, thank you. Thank you, Beth. In this case, we can see that, if we hover over it, the item is 4, but there is no column. So the column was 0, dollar 4.0.0. If we are looking for information in the rows, then we will have also columns. So for example, the item description will be $38 which is the item, 0.3, which is the column, 0.0. So wonderful. Thank you, Beth.
Thanks.
Our next topic after formatted search is to really understand how to use queries in alert management. So SAP out of the box comes with multiple alerts, but the really strength and the power of it. Hold on, before I start, we have a question. Formatted search are available in SAP 9.3 only, or the answer is it's available from the very early versions of SAP, so it's available across all versions. Now, if you use a tool like Volume, so you may want to decide, how to do your automations, because it's better to use one tool, whether to have multiple tools. But the very, going back to the alert management, the very powerful tool is because, we can base it on a query. So anything basically happens in the business will trigger an alert. So let's look at how we do that. So alert management, we have multiple alerts that are coming out of the box. You can determine if to send an internal message or email, things of that nature. You can send it to a group of users. So that's in a nutshell. So those are the alerts out of the box. But it also allows you to, if I go here to add mode, to add a new alert management, as many as you wish. And for example, if I want our sales guys to follow up on a quote, or if I want to trigger something or any alert when production is done, things of that nature. And that helps your people and the users of the system to be more proactive. So for example, if I want to send the daily alerts on quotes that needs to be follow up. So the first thing I would do is generate the query. And I think I have prepared a query here. So let's go to the general. And if we don't have a query, we can quickly generate it. So I'm going to go to OQUT, which is our sales quotations, for example. We're going to select what we want to see in the query and follow by that in the alert. So I'm going to choose the doc number, maybe the doc date, the due date, the customer name, and maybe the document total. If you want the sales employee, not the code, the name, already that we can drag it to the left. It will do the join for us, and then we could select the employee name. If I want to see only the open ones, we could do document status equals only the open ones. And now I get a query of all our open sales quotations. Now I can also do multiple queries, and for each sales employee send their own specific quotes to follow up on, or we can use a UDF for when is the next follow-up date and things of that nature. So we can get sophisticated with that, but I'm showing here just the basics. So let's save that query. I'm going to save it under alert, and we're going to say open sales quotes. Oops. Open sales quotes, and we get to save it. Now I'm going back to my alerts. I'm going to give a name for the alerts. Sales quotes to follow up on. We need to decide that it's going to be active. We're going to open the saved query, and it's going to be under the alert section, open sales quotes. We can set up the frequency. So I can say, send it every day at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. or send it once a week at this day, and things of that nature. And then we can select who are the users that are going to get that, or which is the group of users, if you assign users to a group. And then I'm going to select few of our users as internal message. And of course, my user is Jason Butler. So we're going to find here Jason Butler and trigger an alert for him. But if we want to see that alert, I'm going to define that every minute so we can see that pop up. Okay, so it will pop up under my alert and management every second, or I can always, refresh it here. So here is the test that I did from yesterday that shows me it comes in that way, test alert. It shows me all the opportunities or all the quotations to follow up on, and I can drill down into that specific quotations, follow up with the client or whomever needed, or create an activity if needed, or update that sales order, and ideally to, of course, convert it to a sales order. But in a similar way, we could do basically any alert. So anything could trigger an action from the users. So that's a very powerful tool. Any questions so far? All right. So with that being said, if we finish with the alerts, we're gonna move into the approvals.
Perfect. Thanks, Oren. So the approvals that we're going to look at are similar to what we saw with the formatted search logic, in the sense that we can, use that same syntax that we use for referencing the active window. So we'll go ahead and go into SAP and just take a peek at the approvals and how we can really structure those to, to meet our needs. So we'll go open up the approval templates. Those are also available under this administration menu here. So just taking a quick peek at the approval templates for maybe some of you that aren't as familiar with approvals or don't have them deployed in your system. We have our approval template name. We can determine if it's active, and also if it's active, updating documents that weren't generated by the approval process, which is helpful. And then we have our originators here, so whichever users have created the documents that are in need of being approved. And then also on this next page, the documents that we want to have under the approval process, which is quite a few options here. Then we also have our stages. You can define as many stages as you like. In terms of stages, we can have maybe just one approver on that stage. We could have multiple approvers on the stage, and it's all definable there. And then lastly, and this is the part that's really important for us today, we have our terms. So under the terms, this is telling it when to launch the approval process. So always just means, hey, anytime, say we define it for a sales order, anytime anybody enters a sales order, we want that approval to launch. But for us, we want to focus on this part here. Now we have a couple of defined up here. We have a couple out-of-the-box definitions for launching approvals, deviation from credit limit, gross profit, things like that, document total. So that gives us definitely some flexibility in setting up our approvals. But here we also have terms based on user queries. So we'll go ahead and create one here. And we'll call it James Chan purchase orders. So in this case, let's say James Chan is a junior buyer, and every time he enters a purchase order, we want that to go through approval. So for our purposes here, just so we don't have to log in and log out, we'll enter this originator as Jason Butler, which is our user. If you're doing it in production, you'll want to enter James Chan there. We'll select purchase orders. Here, we'll do this internal requisition stage just because I know Jason Butler there is the approver again, so we'll be able to see it go through the process. And then here we're going to want to add a query. So I've already created a query, and I'll go ahead and show you what this logic looks like. I just added it there. But if we look under approvals, we can see, again, a very simple query. So this is saying select distinct true from purchase order where the SLP code for the purchase order, that's our buyer code, equals 6. And 6 is James Chan's buyer code. So the important part here to see that true, so that's something you may not normally see in a query, and that's just letting SAP know that's the trigger that we want to trigger our approval off of. So if the result comes back true, then the approval will trigger.
And in the same way, you could do more sophisticated queries to account for any logic. So case, when, but the query is, like Beth said, is expecting either true or false.
Exactly. So in the same way that we tested our formatted search logic, we can also test this approval logic. So I find this really beneficial, again, when you don't want to set up the whole approval template and run through a test, have somebody enter a purchase order just to see if your approval is going to work, if your logic's constructed correctly. So in this case, we can make sure you have the purchase order, again, clicked as the active form, then go to Tools, Queries, User Queries, Approvals, and we'll open our approval. And you should see that green bar if it's working. And we'll also be able to see here that we did get that true value back, which means that our approval should trigger. So we can go ahead and test that out just quickly to make sure our approval triggers. We'll select a vendor here. Go ahead and select an item. And make sure James Chan is set as our buyer here. Everything looks good. Oh, and okay. We'll go ahead and add it. And we see already that our James Chan PO request for approval here, we can just say, please approve. Perfect. So everything looks great. And then just in normal approval process setup, we should see that pop up right here. So our request for approving document generation, and then we'd go through and approve. And actually, you can see also Oren's alert there from the alerts management has popped up as well. So any questions covering approvals?
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth. That kind of covers the approval procedure. In our documents that we have shared online, we have a lot of references to additional documentation, videos, and explanations. So, for example, for formatted searches, we have a whole document around it and how to use it in samples and things of that nature. Same thing for approval and alerts. We have relevant videos and things of that nature. With that being said, we're going to go into the more advanced part of the day, which is stored procedures and view, and we're going to see how use cases to those. So we kind of separate that to 3 different portions as related to SAP Business One. One is the 2 SAP stored procedures. That comes with every SAP installation, vanilla installations. SAP have a lot of stored procedures in their database, but they made 2 of them, only 2 of them modifiable. So we're going to look at those, transaction notification and post-transaction notice, to see how we could use them for mandatory fields, validations, things of that nature. The second portion is the custom stored procedure and when to use it. And a stored procedure is really a set of SQL code that allow you to be faster, to allow for a better performance, better security. So it's really great to use stored procedure when you, a custom stored procedure, when you, for example, use the same query over and over again. For example, if you run crystal reports and your query want to compare this year-to-date data versus last year-to-date. So instead of running separate SQL queries, you can create a custom store procedure that will calculate it for you between dates. So for the same calculation, you go to the same store procedure instead of creating long SQLs, and that will make your crystal reports or any connections that you have to the database way faster. The other thing is, from security perspective, you could give access instead of for the whole system and for the actual tables, you can give access only to a specific store procedure, and in the same way to a specific view. So that brings me into the view that this is basically a virtual table. It's basically we are creating a select statement from many different tables and put it under one virtual table, which we call a view. And again, instead of giving somebody some software access to all your data, you can give access only to the view. So from a security point of view, it works better. And from many other perspectives, it also works better. So we're going to see a use case for all those three. So let's go back to SAP. And I'm going to close here all the screens. And we had a questions about the documentation. I know we're going to get to that at the end of this session, but if we have our website here open, we're going to quickly show that. So if you do a search for SQL on our website, it will get us to the SQL training area where we have a blog. We're going to add this video to the blog. So we have different types of things, how to use Crystal, how to use maintenance plan for SQL. We're going to look at the training. And over here we have the part 1 and part 2 recorded, as well as the major features we talked about and different exercises that you can take on yourself to kind of sharpen your skills with querying. At the end of the block, we have all the documentation available. Okay, so if you scroll all the way down in that same blog, you will see some of the things that we look for, but also our full user training documents available. So with that being said, let's look at store procedures. We don't need here SAP. We really need the SQL. The idea is really to, if we start with the first one, the two modifiable SAP stored procedures, is really to look at validations, mandatory fields. You want to have the users, ensure, for example, that when they enter a new customer record, that they field the name, the telephone one, the email, and the website. So mandatory fields is a great way to use stored procedures. Again, if you don't have another tool like Boyum or Core System Country Package, things of that nature. So I just, recommend to keep it consistent. But if you use SAP Vanilla, in order to make mandatory fields, you're going to go to SAP stored procedures. So if you go into your SQL, we can open here our database we're working on, which is the SBO demo US. And all the stored procedure, we're going to see here the views that we're going to talk about later. But all the stored procedures are going to be under programmability. So we have here the stored procedure as the first one. There are many of them that are out of the box coming with SAP Business One. Few of them that we custom created, but we're going to go into the transaction notice and transaction notification. If you're overwhelmed with the amount of stored procedures, you can always, and it's applicable in views and also in stored procedure, you can always filter here. So, I can say where, name contain transaction. Okay. So that's okay. So that will show us only the transaction notice, everything that has transaction. Thank you, Travis, for the tip. So the two that are modifiable are post-transaction notice and transaction notification. You can see that if I do right-click on any other stored procedure, it's grayed out. So the transaction notification is looking at SAP before we adding the transaction. So for example, I add a new BP, a new customer. Before it's been added, it's looking at that SQL query and that validation. The post-transaction notice do something after the transaction is being added. For example, you added a sales order and you want to update something else or a UDT, you will use the post-transaction. So let's look at the transaction notification. The modify now is available. I'm going to do modify, and SAP tells you where to put the code. So, you have a lot of code here. You shouldn't touch it. The only place to touch is add your code here. If you don't have anything in place, all of that will be empty, and I'm going to comment that at this point. So it's not applicable. After every change, you need to execute. You can always make sure that your phrase is correct. But basically, this is every system of SAP coming with that structure, and you will have only add your code here. Don't touch any of that. Touch just here. So, for example, when we do store procedure, I would have few guidelines. One, and let me uncomment this for now. One is make sure that you have some kind of commented verbiage to state what you're doing. So if somebody else go to the code and need to check something, they know what they're going to do. So in this case, I'm blocking sales order if Namit card customer reference number is the Namit card field is missing. Okay. And the second thing to make sure is give an appropriate error message to the user, because the user may get all kinds of different error messages. Some of them are out of the box error messages to keep consistency of the system. The other thing I would do is add a little bit of SPPB1 in this case, because we want to show the user or the administrator of the system that it's a custom mandatory fields and not one of the system fields, so they know somebody who to contact. So in this case, we give an appropriate message. Customer ref number is missing, so the user knows what is missing and what they need to do. So here is the syntax. It's and you could do that for everything. Pretty simple. I would just copy paste that syntax and kind of modify to your needs. In this case, if object type equals 17, which is the sales order, and transaction type is in A or U, if it will work on the add, but also on the update. Okay, so in both cases, so you could do either or both in this case. And then we need to declare our variables. What do we want to set as mandatory fields? In this case, we set a variable Namit card, which is the customer ref number, and the field is nvarchar 100. Let's look at that field for a second, because we normally we like to define it as it's in the database. So if I hover over this field, and you will look at this area here on the bottom left, if I hover over this, we could see that this is BP reference number. The table is ORDR. The field name is Namit card, and it's 100 characters. So we want to keep it in the same format, date and varchar, things of that nature. So we declare that variables and varchar 100, and then we select what is going to be in that variable for the system to check. So what's going to be in that variable is the query Namit card from ORDR, where doc entry equals this. And this is like the dollar sign in a formatted search. It forces the system to look at the existing document or form that the user is really looking at. And then once we have that variable hold the Namit card from that specific transaction, then we can have a logic. And in this case, we say if Namit card is null or Namit card is empty, with again those single quotes, begin. So it will go through that error message only if it answers this condition, and we can have any condition that we wish here. And it will set an error, and it will throw that error. So let's look at how the user will see that in SAP. So I'm gonna go to add a new sales order, exceed the credit limit. I'm gonna approve it, and we're gonna select a delivery date today. and we're going to select a quick random item. We're going to try to add the sales order without a customer reference number. This one is empty. So it let us add that. It should not have. So let's see what happened here. I'm gonna execute it just in case. And it should also work on an update. So I'm gonna try to make just a quick update here. So now it gives me the error message. I basically uncommented the query, but I didn't execute it, and this is why it didn't work. So if it will work on an update, if I do here even a space, it will not let me go through because I also added when it's null or when it's equals single quote, single quote. But if I have here any value, hello world, or the customer reference number, now it will let me go through. And of course, it will work also when I add a new sales order. I'm gonna just go through that real quick and choose the same customer, the same item, try to add, it will block me. Adding some customer ref, it will let me proceed. In the same case, we can do that for a sales order, for adding a customer, for adding an item, for adding a production, for anything in the system, we can really block based on a specific logic. Just a matter, if you have many of them, is to maintain them appropriately and to write notes of what exactly you're doing. The next example that I have here is kind of just a tiny bit more complicated. What I do here is something very similar with the same Namit card, but I'm looking at a PO. What I'm doing here is, let me uncomment that, and in this case, I'm gonna execute, so it will work. What we are doing here is we are looking at a PO, block PO if Namit card already exists. So I want to check if that number that the user entering in that PO already exists. And in that case, we want to give them an appropriate message that PO with the same vendor ref number already exists, okay? So let's look at that. We're going to go into the purchase order. I'm going to go to a previous one. Maybe we'll take that Far East imports. We see we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm gonna go through it and select that vendor, select a random item, and try to add the purchase order. Well, obviously it requires approval, so let me cancel the approval first. I like to go through the menus. So approval templates, we're gonna search for the Jason Butler. No, it's not that. James Chen. I'm gonna make it inactive and update. And now I'm gonna try to add the purchase order so it wouldn't take me through the approval process. And I added that purchase order. Now, if we look at the same vendor, and I'm gonna try to do 1, 2, 3, 4, it will say PO with same vendor ref number already exists. So now I know I already have the same purchase order number, and I can go and do my research, maybe search for that PO, see how many we have of that PO, and see if I need to create a new PO. If I do have to create a new PO and I want to bypass that, we can have another field to help bypass that, or we can just have a different number. V3 will do the work just fine. Okay, just quickly, let's go through how it looks. If object type equal 22, which is the PO, and if you're gonna query the table of OPOR, you will see that one of the fields is object type, so that's how you can know what is the object type in different tables. And transaction type is when I add and when I update. I declare my variables. I had to create a new variable, not Namit card. That's why I call it Namit card PO. And the reason is I already used it in the sales order, so we cannot repeat the same variables in different stored procedures code, okay? So then I have select card code. I'm looking for the card code for the vendor from the document I'm looking at, and then select NAMIT card PO equals NAMIT card from the OPOR, where doc entry equals list of code now. So I'm looking at the card code and the NAMIT card from that specific PO. And then my logic is, if NAMIT card, if my vendor reference number is in my database, not including the current document that I'm looking at, then start with that error message, okay? And with the same thing, we can have many different stored procedures. We're gonna talk shortly about the post-transaction notice, but we're gonna get back to that after maybe Elizabeth will show the post-transaction notice. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat.
Wonderful, thanks so much. So we wanted to just show you what custom stored procedures can do. So one of the benefits here is that we can take things, take some custom stored procedures and, like we'll show you today, update a user-defined table. So let's go ahead and remove this filter here, and we'll go ahead and find the stored procedure that we've created for this. So another kind of helpful tip, like Oren was saying, to in your error messages, add some kind of PB1 or maybe your company, something like that. It also helps in filtering out, so you can find which custom stored procedures or views you've created. So here we can right-click and select Modify. So this custom stored procedure is going to take data from our sales order form. It's going to take our internal document number, our salesperson name, and our document total, and it's going to put it into a user-defined table.
And stored procedures, just to say, could do insert, could do update, could do select. In many cases, we just do select. In this case, we wanted to show something more advanced. But it's important to understand you cannot and shouldn't do any insert or update on SAP native tables. You can do that on UDTs, but never update or insert to an SAP native table.
Yeah, very important. So this is the table that we're going to insert this data in, and you can see there's already a little bit of data in there. So we'll see how you can do this manually, how we could execute this stored procedure manually, but we'll also see how to tie in that post-transaction notification and automate this kind of data gathering. So we'll go ahead and pick our customer here, date, we'll add an item.
And Beth, because of time limitation, we may need to go through that faster.
Sounds good. So we saw Oren's little message right there. Perfect. And so now we can go ahead and execute this straight from SAP. We'll open up our little query preview window. And all we want to do here is just say execute dbo.pb1_sales, which is the name of our stored procedure. And here we can execute it. We saw here that our little green bar popped up to show us that it went through successfully. And if we go back to our form, we'll go up here, refresh it, and see that that data was added. And so just to show you quickly what this can look like for, integrating it with the post-transaction notification. We'll go ahead and, there we go. So we'll open up our post-transaction notice, just say modify, and I already have this little blip in here that's going to give us our logic. So this is just saying update the UDT upon the sales order being added. So when the sales order is added, that same logic, just execute the stored procedure. So we uncomment that, execute it to make sure that that change is saved. And then we'll just go ahead and quickly add another sales order to show you that it's going to automatically add that data. All right. We'll say yes, that document's added. And then when we go back to our sales data form, we can refresh and see that we don't have to execute it manually anymore. Our data is already there. So that kind of wraps up our custom stored procedures, as well as touching on just a little bit of the functionality that we can get out of our post-transaction stored procedures as well, and how those can kind of work together.
Thank you, Beth. Excellent. Any questions, please feel free to write in the chat. We're going to go into the next one, which is the views. And let's look at how we do a view. So you could always go to the view areas, and the view is really to use by, other softwares if you wish to create a pre-populated query that will show sales analysis, so you don't have to recreate the query over and over again. And also from a security perspective. So if you want to connect with your, for example, shipping carriers, or if you want Crystal reports to connect to that, or other things, it's better always to create a view than to bring so many tables into the tool that you're using. So views, you could do right-click and new view. It will take you through a wizard. But I'm going to show you how to do that, writing a code, because it's pretty simple. So let's say that you already have a code available, so you already created a query. For example, in this case, I'm going to do journal entries. I have a query that shows all the journal entries. Pretty simple query, just basically a select from JDT1. I join OJDT. I join the OACT. Okay, just all the journal entries. And I want to create out of that a view. So what I could do is select everything, copy. I go to SQL, and let's call it financial. So I'm going to do, on the database, I could do new query. And all I need to do is create view. I need to give it a name, finance as, or PB1 finance, right? Beth? PB1 finance as, and all I need to do is add the query. I can check my syntax, I can execute, it's there. Now I just need to refresh my database, and when I look at the views now, I could go to F and see my finance, P, sorry, to P, actually. PB1 finance. So now I can redesign it if I ever have to add more fields, things of that nature, or I can select the top rows or edit, or anything of that nature. If I go to the design, you can see how I can add different things. I can execute it from here, add tables, add fields, anything that I wish. And after I do that, don't forget to save. You could also execute the view from SAP. But this is basically the view. So let's see a use case for the view. And that kind of lead us to the last section, how we connect basically Excel. So Excel can connect to SQL. Let's say we want to connect to that view that I created, financials, and do a custom P&L and compare last year versus this year. With Crystal Report, it's probably going to be a task that will take us, few days to create and fine-tune and finalize. With Excel, it will be probably few minutes, or, depends how granular you go with that. So let's see how that works. So let me go into my Excel. In Excel, you have a place called data. You go into the data, and it will give you multiple options. Some of them queries and connections you already created. I'm going to go from scratch. So I'm going to go to get data. And as you see, a lot of things available, from file, from CSV, from XML, We're going to use from database, from SQL Server database, but there are other tools available from Azure, from online services. For example, if you have HANA, you need to define ODBC, but you can connect from here using that. And as I said, we're going to do from SQL Server in this case. So we're going to do that. It will ask us what are the servers, credentials, stuff like that. I already did that yesterday, so it will ask me just for the server. So I always like to copy paste. So I'm going to connect here to my SQL, and I'm going to copy the server name into Excel. You could select the database if you wish, redo your, but I'm going to do OK, so it will show me all the databases. So when I do OK, it will show me all the databases. We are looking at the SBO demo US. So this is what I'm going to connect to, and I'm looking really on a specific view. So those two, windows icon show us all the views, but also all the tables are here and store procedures. Okay. So and those are obviously the tables when you see one table. So view is a multiple table, and I can always search. So if I did finance, it will show me PB1 finance, so I could do that. And I can say load. It can show me preview, but I know my query, so I'm going to do load. And what it will do is it will load all the data into Excel. And then I can also look at the properties of that data and really define, different things. I can also define how often that Excel will be refreshed, so it's automatically will be connected to my database. Now I'm connected to my database real time, and I can start using the tools of Excel as I wish. What I normally do is I like to insert pivot because that gives me unlimited things. But that's now just an Excel game. So I'm going to enter pivot table to a new worksheet. I'm going to click OK, and in a new worksheet, I now have a pivot table. Now I can say, show me the account name. Okay, clicking on that will show the account name. Show me the debit, show me the credit. Automatically, it's also recommend to summarize, so I see the full debits and sum of debits and credits of the account. Obviously, I can make it a $sign and anything Excel will allow me to do. Let's see. Let's say we want to do the due date or the rev date, actually. Okay, and it will show me all the years here. Let me do something like that. Let's say if we want to have the years here instead of the months, we could do that. If we want to have the years, for example, in the header, so to see that side by side, we can simply move the year into the column area. Let's say we don't want all the years, we want just the past 2 years. Okay, Excel pivot allow you to do just that. So let's say we want 2018, 2019. Okay, so now it's side by side. If we want to have the father, the level of the account or the father number, what is the header of the account, things of that nature. So all of that is really available on the playing with the Excel pivot. Very, very strong tool. I've seen a lot of views and beautiful sales analysis, forecasting, and things of that nature that you can do with Excel. But the strength of that it's real-time connected to your system. So that's on a nutshell, really what we wanted to cover today. And I think we ran out of time, so we're gonna wrap up here. Documentations we have is that we have we have the SQL blog post that I shared earlier, so that's available here, and we're gonna send it to all our clients, and this is gonna be available on our website as well. PB1 user training documents is also available there. We have a YouTube with all the part 1, 2, and 3 of our, so this is a link to our channel. We have a tips and tricks LinkedIn group that you could participate, and a lot of SQL queries available. We find that treasure, so feel free to go there It will show you different samples of different queries around different areas. For example, how fast you ship a product, how much time it takes from a sales order to delivery. So a lot of treasures here. And of course, Google. Sharpen your skills using Google. I use it every day when I do SQL. So I see that there are no questions. So with that being said, feel free to write questions, but we're going to summarize here. We went through advanced selection criteria. We went through formatted search, alerts, approvals, things that you could do with queries. We went into stored procedures and how to use different stored procedures and views. Of course, the Excel connections and where you can get more documentation. So we really wanted to thank you for participating. Thank you for bringing that as required education. Please feel free to let us know if there are other educations needed, and we'll be happy to incorporate that into our future monthly webinars. So thank you everybody for participating, and have a great Friday and great weekend.